All right, so hi guys. This is Zach Jones, and this is Miss Dr. Hilton-Prillhart, and she has been in education for 17 years. She's an all-around amazing lady, and she's currently employed at Milligan College. And so I will just be having an interview with her today, asking questions based off of the book Multicultural Education and Pluralistic Society. And some of these questions are just questions that are going to really have her opinion behind them, and her educational experience is going to help out in answering these questions better than I can answer these questions. All right, so we're going to start. I'll just ask the first question.
All right.
Based off your opinion, your experience, ethnocentrism, simply put, is where one becomes closed off to other cultures. Do you think this would be a problem within a classroom? And also, do you think some classrooms are like that in America today, are closed off to other cultures? And what kind of issues do you think that would incite?
Okay, I think that could definitely be a problem within the classroom, because once a student is closed off to other cultures, or a teacher, instructor for that matter, I feel like it really limits the ability to take someone else's perspective, and so therefore it's going to limit your ability to think and engage and really inhibit critical thinking, I think, even within the classroom. Also, I think a lot of that does occur, especially when you're in schools where maybe you're working with a very homogenous group of students who haven't had exposure to other cultures, but sometimes it's difficult for them to even recognize, like, maybe what they don't know about other cultures. So I think really, like, from an educational perspective, a learning perspective, it's going to interfere quite a bit with perspective taking and with being able to work collaboratively with others.
Right. That's a very interesting point. It's definitely a great idea. What do you think we can do to solve that problem?
I think just giving kids wide exposures to various cultures. So that's easy if you're working with a very diverse group of students. You just give them lots of opportunities to get to know each other, to create a really respectful culture, to engage and talk with each other, so that they get to hear different stories, different backgrounds, different takes on, maybe even a similar situation. I think for those classrooms, and I'm thinking particularly about rural classrooms in our area, where there's not a great deal of diversity.
Right.
You could do things like bring in lots of rich multicultural literature and just give kids exposures that way to different points of view, different cultures, different background stories that maybe otherwise they would not have exposure to at all.
Okay, that's a very good answer. Second question here is, what can we do as teachers to help kids from different backgrounds feel accepted within our classrooms?
I'm a big believer that with any child, regardless of their background, that you really foster an environment of compassion and openness and wanting to learn about that child, and making sure that everyone in the classroom has a voice. And so I think when those things are in place, it becomes easier to foster a culture of respect among all students, and also to make kids who maybe, perhaps they're the only Latino student in that class, for instance, feel comfortable, feel like they're part of the group, and help other kids get to know that student as well. So from my perspective, it's more of a generalist perspective, that you just create a very open, compassionate, discussion-based kind of atmosphere with your students.
Okay. So would you say that, like, if you did have that Latino student within the classroom and creating a discussion within the classroom, do you think that, what would you do if there were tensions between the Latino kid when explaining his culture and another student?
I think I would want to get those students together, maybe outside, and particularly if it's just maybe a couple of students that are having difficulty with each other. I think I'd want to arrange some meetings with them, maybe just over lunch or something really informal, just to kind of give them a chance to talk about what the problem is or what their perspective is regarding that other person. Because I think that oftentimes in education, we're so afraid of addressing those issues that we just ignore it, or we try to create environments where those discussions are never going to happen, so that there's not any opportunity for conflict. But I think, if we can sort of take on a leadership and like a facilitator role within our classrooms and give kids the opportunity to talk those things out and let them kind of come to their own conclusions and their own reconciliation with each other, that's way more effective in the long run than just trying to gloss over like, this isn't an issue, we're not going to talk about this in our class.
Yeah, and I know that in these rural areas you can kind of get like a little bit of tension. So that's why I kind of asked that question. Yes. I had one kid in one of my classes that I was interning at. He was white, and he had a problem with one of the Latino students, just basically because they didn't speak English well, and he was just very, not very accepting of that Latino student. So when you have these different problems, I do think that it would be good to get discussion going, so that way they can understand each other's perspectives a little bit better. Right. So
and if it's a pretty intense conflict, like maybe even pulling in the school counselor to regularly meet and work with those students. Yeah. But I think, for many of our rural students, but also for some of our students that are not growing up in rural areas, they're coming from households where maybe like the parents are particularly supportive of immigration and over-stereotype Latino students or, other ethnicities as well. And so I think sometimes, at least in the work that I've done with adolescents, sometimes they don't even know that what they're saying is really offensive to other people because they've just been surrounded by it within their home environment or in their family environment. Yeah. And so when they get to hear that other person's perspective, it's pretty powerful. It's like, wow, I didn't know it. I didn't know it was going to be taken that way, or I didn't know that that's what I'm saying really meant. That kind of situation. Yeah,
I get that, and that's a great point of view. So another question would be, do you think competitiveness is something that should take place within our classrooms?
I'm not a big fan of competitiveness, and I think actually when you look at some of the research, like cooperation and collaboration actually produces better results within classroom environments in terms of learning gains and just kind of group cohesiveness within your classroom. So I'm not a huge proponent of competition. When I worked in the public schools, I actually tried to avoid competition and more foster like a sense of collaboration with students. There were a few occasions, especially with some of my older students that I worked with, where we might work in teams to kind of compete against teams. But that happened usually much later in the school years.
Once everybody is comfortable with each other.
Yes.
Because I do feel like competitiveness in the classroom, while we live in a capitalistic society where we promote that, obviously, it can hurt other kids. So one kid, it might provide more opportunity to learn, but for the other kid that's getting beat or whatever, they might be like upset or discouraged, and they might not take that class as a learning opportunity.
That's such a good point, Zach, because I feel like in classrooms that are extremely competitive, like there's a real, with the kids, not so much with the teacher, but the kids really start to recognize differences within each other. Whereas if you're really kind of instilling, this is a cooperative environment, we're all going to work together, then there's more of an emphasis on like strengths that people bring to the table. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. All right, so the next question, do you think ethnicity plays a major role in why kids are accepted or rejected in different role groups? Why or why not?
I think that it can. I think that there are a lot of factors that lead to peer rejection or peer acceptance, but I do believe, in a lot of our schools, there's still a good deal of racism that happens, and a lot of student-to-student racism. So, just kind of being excluded because of a difference in any way, whether it's that you don't speak the language well, or you look different, or you look like you're coming from a different environment. I see a lot of peer rejection and discrimination based on SES level in our schools. That's probably one of the more striking things to me, but I think that there's definitely an element of exclusion based on race and ethnicity.
Why do you think that is?
I think, once again, it just kind of gets back to like the environments that kids are raised in. And so if you're raised in an environment where all of your friends kind of look the same, and all of your parents' friends look the same, and you're not exposed to a wide level of diversity, even if there's no overt prejudice within your home environment, you just don't get that exposure to people of different backgrounds. And so I think sometimes there's this perception, from the beginning, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that, oh, this person's different from me, they're different from the kind of people that are within my friend circle. And so there's less of a willingness to include that person.
Would you say in an urban area or a rural area?
I think that happens all over. I really do.
I do too.
I think in our rural areas, sometimes you're dealing in situations where you may just have one child of a different ethnicity, one or two, in a class. But most of my work as a teacher has happened in very urban areas. And I've seen the same thing happen in urban areas, that you've got your different kind of sects and groups of kids, and a lot of times those are divided along racial lines. Racial boundaries,
How important do you think it is for a person to be aware of his or her culture? In other words, should culture be a big deal in people's lives?
I think it's huge.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't understand your own culture and have a good understanding of your own cultural background, then you're much less likely to be able to identify your own biases toward other cultural backgrounds. So knowing about your own culture, kind of knowing what you believe, and being just aware of your thoughts when you're exposed to someone from a different background, whether it's a racial or an ethnic background. Just being aware of that is really, really important. And so if you don't have an awareness of your own culture and your own background, I think it's really hard to identify how you're responding to people from other backgrounds.
To others, exactly. How big of an issue is the issue of class division within schools? How can we solve that issue, do you think?
It's huge. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that I see, at least in my work in Northeast Tennessee, that there's so much division based on SES level, and especially the older kids are, that, it becomes...
And for those who don't know what SES means,
socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
So basically, the income of their family or financial background. But, especially for older kids, it becomes very important, the kind of shoes you wear, the kind of shirts you wear, your Armor All hoodies, or whatever. And so I feel like there's a lot of class division because kids who don't have that are sometimes really excluded just based on financial reasons, because they're not wearing the right thing, or they're not, or maybe their parents don't have the money to put them in sports activities or music lessons, and so I think sometimes they miss out on some opportunities that way. But when I see a lot of groups form, particularly starting in about middle school, it seems like a lot of times that not only do racial divisions exist, but some pretty serious class divisions exist as well.
Right.
And sometimes those overlap.
Exactly. And do you think equal education truly takes place within schools? In other words, do you think teachers teach students differently that are from a poor background or a wealthier background?
I like to think that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But I think that it really depends on the teacher's level of training, the teacher's level of awareness, and whether or not the teacher kind of holds this belief that you have to have high expectations for all students. So I would really hate to think that any educator would look at a student maybe coming from a lower socioeconomic background, or from a different ethnic background, and have lower expectations for those students. Because if we look at research on education, one of the constants is that just having high expectations for your students and instilling in them this "I can" attitude, I believe in you, I know you can do it, that overcomes a lot of barriers. So I think very effective teachers have that kind of attitude, and they create that kind of environment. It's probably not universal.
Yeah, that's probably true. All right, do you believe that there to be equality for everyone in job opportunities? So we just talked a little bit about equality within the classroom and true education. to everybody equal education. Do you think that once those kids get out into the job, looking for jobs, do you think that there will be an equal opportunity for them?
I mean, we certainly have laws about equal opportunity, and this is probably an area where I'm less versed, but I'm thinking, that if an employer has a mindset that the person for that position needs to look a certain way or talk a certain way or dress a certain way, then I think that there probably is a lot of bias in job selection and job opportunities and job growth. Once again, not as a universal, but I'm certain that there are probably circumstances where that's a routine occurrence, unfortunately.
Let's see. Do you think that there are more opportunities for people of a different race or for people of a different gender as compared to those in the majority? Which would you say has a bigger impact on getting a job, the race or the gender? So basically, do you think that there's a difference between race and gender in finding a job? And what do you think would be more beneficial to somebody to be more part of the majority group in race or to be a male?
Wow, that's a hard question to answer, Zach. And I have to wonder if there's like an interplay between the two.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's
a
difficult question. And that one would just be like personal opinion, I guess. But based on your experience, what do you think do you think it would be harder for a woman who, say, is white to get hired in a job as compared to a black male that shows up? What do you think an employer would look at first? That the fact that she's a woman or the fact that he's black?
I don't know, because in my head I'm thinking there's so many variables that could play into that situation. So, is the woman married? Is the employer worried that she might go on maternity leave like within a couple of years? Are they similarly qualified? Like, what's their skill level? How do they present themselves?
Yeah.
It's just really, really hard. It's really hard to know.
Yeah, as a hard question. But both of those factors are definitely, would you say those are both factors that employers would kind of look at and maybe take into consideration before hiring somebody?
I think there's potential for that, and whether it's a conscious or subconscious decision, like we all, respond to people in different ways, and so, a lot of like very male-driven kind of IT fields, it might be harder for a female to prove herself. So I could see maybe an African American male having an advantage if it's already a profession where someone's anticipating that they're going to hire a male for that job. Whereas, I'm not sure, even when I think about hiring teachers, I could maybe see an African American male having an advantage over a female because an administrator might look at that person and think, I would love to have this individual as a model for my students
or
and
coach.
Or
Coach.
Getting into maybe some stereotypes
so,
there
you
too.
can get
But I know the only time I've ever really thought about that in my professional life, I've never really felt like it made much of a difference, except when I was first out of school and I was going to apply for an elementary position as a special ed teacher. And I'd never given this thought before, but I'm sitting there in the interview room, waiting to go in for the interview, and this guy walks in. He's also going to interview, and I'm thinking, well, there goes my chances, because there are so few men who teach in elementary. So, but aside from that, I'm going to think about your questions some more, because I haven't.
Sounds good.
I haven't really considered that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question for sure.
It is. It really is. I wonder if there's any research on those outcomes.
Probably have to look into that, but I'm pretty sure there probably is somewhere out there. So, and the last question here, this is kind of a kicker. So,
great. The last one was hard enough.
Yeah, if a teacher has a gay student, what do you think the teacher should do for that student, if anything?
I think that teacher's obligation is the same for that student as it would be for any other student in that classroom. I do feel like if you have gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender students in your classroom, that you might have to be more watchful about issues of bullying with students, and regardless of what your personal beliefs might be about whether that's sinful or that's right or that's wrong. We do have a responsibility to make sure that all students in our care are safe and that their emotional and social, needs are met. So I think, just the same obligation, the high expectations for that student, the same attempts to build positive relationships with that student, but maybe with a little more vigilance toward how that student's being perceived or treated by other students in the classroom.
And in a scenario where you do have a gay student within your classroom, if they come up to you and they're still trying to figure things out, because they do that in the teen years, they're still in the exploration phase, and they come up and they start asking you questions, how do you approach that situation?
I think as a professional, I would probably refer them to the school counselor.
Yeah.
Because especially if we're working in a public school, we can't really talk about religious beliefs or anything like that.
Yeah.
If it were a private school or a private Christian school, that might be a different, conversation that you would have with that student. But particularly in a public school, I think it would be a good idea to refer that person to the school counselor, because that you kind of get into a situation there too as a classroom teacher, where if you say the wrong thing, you could really upset parents as well. So I think letting a professional kind of handle that through the school counseling office would be my course of action.
Yeah, awesome, great answer. That's it. You've done great. Thank you guys, and thank you, Dr. Hilton.
All right.
It's been
Thanks,
awesome.
Zach. All right.
Thanks.